Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Scott Spivey and Weldon Boyd. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Scott Ryan Spivey was born on March 5, 1990, in Raleigh, North Carolina. In 2013, he earned a bachelor's degree in agriculture business management. In June 2022, when Scott was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was in a terrible collision which involved him flipping his pickup truck 3 times. After this, he decided to move to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and live in a trailer on land his parents owned on Camp Swamp Road. To make a living, he worked as an insurance adjuster. In the summer of 2023, he broke up with a love interest and was devastated by this loss. Also living in North Myrtle Beach at this time was a man named Weldon Boyd. He was a military veteran who owned a restaurant. Just like Scott, Weldon had a recent breakup. His fiancée, who was 7 months pregnant, returned a 5-carat diamond engagement ring to him. Anticipating a custody battle with her, Weldon used an app on his phone, which recorded his phone calls. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On September 9, 2023, 33-year-old Scott Spivey drank for several hours at a bar called Boardwalk Billy's in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He consumed 7 beers, 3 shots of Fireball cinnamon whiskey, and a cheeseburger. He left the bar at 5:30 p.m., driving his black 2021 Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck. Scott was in the possession of a pistol chambered in .45 ACP. At the same time, Weldon Boyd was in his white 2022 Dodge Ram pickup truck hooked to a trailer which contained a couch. In the passenger seat was his best friend, Kenneth Williams, who went by the name Bradley. Both Weldon and Bradley were carrying pistols chambered in 9mm Luger. The men had just pulled out of a parking lot for a Tractor Supply store. At 5:48 p.m., some type of disagreement developed between Scott and Weldon near the intersection of Highway 9 and Highway 57. Weldon would later say that Scott swerved near his vehicle and waved a gun. Scott then pulled ahead of Weldon and slammed on the brakes. Weldon swerved to avoid slamming into Scott and ended up in a ditch in the median. He pulled out of the ditch and pursued Scott. About 5 miles into this chase, at 5:54 p.m., Weldon Boyd called 911. He told the operator, quote, "Hey, I've got a guy pointing a gun at me driving. We are armed as well. He keeps throwing the gun in our faces, acting like he's about to shoot us. If he keeps this up, I'm going to shoot him," unquote. He informed the operator that he was on Highway 9 headed toward the town of Loris, and that the other vehicle was running from him. Weldon stayed on the phone with the operator and pursued Scott all the way to Camp Swamp Road. Again, this is the road that Scott lived on. When Scott turned on this road, Weldon said, quote, "He's stopping. Hey, we're about to have a blanking shootout, dude," unquote. Scott stopped his Silverado, and Weldon stopped his Ram behind him. Scott exited his vehicle holding his pistol and said something like, "Do not follow me anymore." At 6:04 p.m., both Weldon and Bradley fired multiple shots at Scott. 40 rounds were fired between them. Bullet holes could be seen in the windshield of Weldon's Dodge Ram. Evidently, the men fired right through the windshield. Scott jumped back in his truck and fired several times before slumping over the center console. Weldon told the operator, "Dude, please come help us, man." Weldon also made other statements, including, "I don't know if he's shot or not. He shot blanking first. Why the blank would he do that? And as soon as he shot, I shot back." The first officer arrived on scene at 6:10 p.m. and discovered Scott's body slumped over the center console of his Silverado. A detective named Alan Jones was assigned to conduct the investigation into Scott's death. Witnesses had observed Scott driving erratically and pointing a pistol at individuals in another vehicle. Someone had captured at least one image of Scott holding a gun out of his window. At the scene of the shooting, witnesses did not know who shot first, but they did see Scott outside his vehicle holding a pistol. An autopsy revealed that the fatal shot struck Scott in his back. It only took the detective, Allen, a few hours to conclude that the killing of Scott was self-defense, but of course the official report would take longer to generate. Allen indicated that Scott's behavior led to his death, namely driving erratically and pointing a gun at people. On April 18, 2024, the Attorney General's office told Scott's family that no charges would be filed against Weldon or Bradley. They concluded that Scott brandished a firearm and Weldon and Bradley had the right to be on Camp Swamp Road. This was a case of self-defense. On June 3, 2024, Scott's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Weldon and Bradley. The police released information to Scott's family, who learned that Weldon had recorded his phone calls. As I mentioned, he did this because he was anticipating a custody dispute with his pregnant ex-fiancée. These recorded calls were pretty interesting and have caused some people to take a second look at this case. Here are a few examples of what was captured on these recordings. Right after the shooting, Bradley could be heard telling Weldon, "Blanket, Weldon, why couldn't we blanking leave him alone?" Weldon then told Bradley not to worry and reassured him that he knew people that could help them out. At this point, Weldon called a police officer named Brandon Strickland, who was in charge of the criminal investigations at the Horry County Police Department. This is the county where the shooting took place. Brandon told Weldon, "I got the people coming that need to come," and indicated that he had hand-picked the detective for the case. As I mentioned, the detective was Alan Jones. On September 10, 2023, the day after the shooting, Brandon called Weldon and apologized for not being able to be there. Brandon explained how he called the captain over investigations and told him who Weldon was. He said, quote, "You were taken care of," unquote, and further reassured Weldon with the words, quote, "I was in the shadows last night. I wasn't there, but I was in the shadows," unquote. During another phone call between Brandon and Weldon, Brandon advised him to keep a low profile and stay off Facebook. Brandon said, quote, "If I thought you had something to worry about, I'd tell you. I'm telling you, you have nothing to worry about," unquote. In a phone call with a family member, Weldon said that Brandon told him that any warrants for his arrest would have to go through him. At another point, Brandon told Weldon that the investigation would have been more complicated if the person who died had been a black man. Referring to Scott's race, Brandon said, quote, "I'm glad it's a white male," unquote. Later, he continued with this theme, saying, quote, "You would have really had people running their mouths then. White business owner shoots black male," unquote. Weldon made it seem like he enjoyed the shooting when he told Bradley, quote, "I know it's blanked up to say, but I had a blanking blast. I had a good time," unquote. Weldon appeared to be confident that Brandon Strickland was protecting him. When he talked to Bradley, he said, quote, "When I tell you we had a lot of my friends work together on this for us, we definitely did," unquote. Weldon predicted this would have been ugly if Scott had traveled a mile farther on Camp Swamp Road because he would have left Horry County. During a conversation with his mother, Weldon indicated that he chased Scott after Scott aimed a gun at Bradley's head. Weldon said, quote, "Oh, I was on his blank, and his truck couldn't outrun my truck, and he knew it. So yeah, he was terrified," unquote. All these recordings brought up two major concerns. It undermined Weldon's claim of self-defense by making him seem too aggressive, and it pointed to potential corruption on the part of the police. Did their relationship with Weldon influence the outcome of the investigation? On March 11, 2025, Brandon Strickland resigned. His lawyers told the media that Brandon had not exerted any influence on the case, and they pointed out that there is a huge difference between public corruption and poor taste. On April 17, 2025, the top administrator for Horry County asked the State Law Enforcement Division to reopen the case. At the time I'm making this video, there is no investigation, and the case is still considered to be closed. Neither Weldon Boyd nor Bradley Williams have been charged with any crime. Now moving to my analysis. The two main issues in this case involve the potential guilt of Weldon and Bradley in the shooting death of Scott and potential police corruption. I will look at these issues separately. First, let's take a look at the shooting. Some people have argued that Weldon and Bradley should have been charged in connection with the shooting death of Scott, despite the state's determination that the men acted in self-defense. This brings me to the question, were Weldon and Bradley guilty of any type of crime? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that they were guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. There is no question that Scott brandished a firearm, which provoked the confrontation. The problem is, Weldon pursued Scott, and based on the cell phone recordings, Weldon believed that Scott was afraid of him. How can someone claim self-defense when they chased a person down for miles? Scott provoked the confrontation initially, but he attempted to disengage by driving away at high speed. At some point, his provocation can no longer be used against him. The effect of a provocation has an expiration. On the 911 call, Weldon repeatedly indicated that he may have to shoot Scott. The bullet that killed Scott was fired into his back. Moving to the exculpatory factors, Scott Spivey was intoxicated. He should not have been carrying a firearm or driving. He brandished a firearm, which put Weldon and Bradley in fear for their safety. Weldon may have pursued Scott because he was worried about the safety of the public. Clearly, Scott was a danger to society. Pursuing Scott was ill-advised. However, as the state pointed out, Weldon and Bradley had a right to be on Camp Swamp Road, where Scott ultimately stopped his truck. Weldon claimed that Scott fired first. Witnesses did not see who fired first, but they did see Scott with a pistol in his hand standing next to his pickup truck. This corroborates part of Weldon's story. As for Bradley, he was not the driver of Weldon's Dodge Ram. He was placed in a situation where he was facing Scott holding a gun and possibly shooting it. Even if Weldon was responsible for some wrongdoing, Bradley did not have a choice but to be where Weldon took him. Bradley was thrown into a tense and life-threatening situation. After the shooting, Weldon did not appear to be scared by the fact that there were witnesses. He even encouraged those witnesses to stay and talk to the police. This would be a strange move if Weldon had something to hide. One would think that he would want the witnesses to leave and not talk to the police. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Weldon and Bradley committed some type of crime? This is a tricky case. I think it comes down to three questions. Did the provocation that Scott introduced expire when he fled, so that Weldon could not claim that Scott provoked the confrontation at the scene of the shooting? Did Weldon have the legal right to pursue Scott, even if doing so was ill-advised? And did Weldon's pursuit constitute provocation on his part? Like, did he provoke Scott on Camp Swamp Road? In my opinion, the provocation introduced by Scott did expire because Scott made a significant effort to disengage. Weldon was within his rights when he followed Scott. And simply following somebody does not necessarily constitute provocation, especially in light of Scott's criminal behavior. He should have expected people to be interested in identifying him so he could be arrested by the police. Furthermore, Weldon and Bradley fired right through the windshield of the Dodge Ram. It's not like they exited the vehicle and closed the distance with Scott on foot. If Scott discharged his weapon first on Camp Swamp Road, Weldon and Bradley had the right to defend themselves. There is no way to prove that Scott did not fire first. In my opinion, there is insufficient evidence to support any charge against Weldon or Bradley. The state of South Carolina made the right decision, even if there was some corruption involved in the investigation. This takes me to the second concern in this case. Was there corruption on the part of the police? Based on the recordings captured on Weldon's phone, I believe that Brandon Strickland was attempting to influence the investigation. He implied that a few times, which included saying the words, "You were taken care of." Brandon can argue that he was just bragging or lying, and that very well could be true. For example, Alan Jones, the detective who investigated the case, was assigned because he was on call during the time of the shooting. Brandon never actually selected him to investigate the incident. Even so, I think it is difficult for Brandon Strickland to escape his own words. I view the recordings as a confession on the part of Brandon. In my opinion, there was public corruption in this case, and his behavior undermined the public trust. Now moving to my final thoughts. The focus of this case has been placed on Weldon and Bradley, as well as the police. But it is important to remember that Scott Spivey started the incident that led to his death. He drove while intoxicated and brandished a weapon. This was going to end badly one way or the other. At a minimum, Scott was going to be arrested. Ultimately, he achieved an even worse outcome. It's not clear what caused Scott's behavior. Maybe he was upset by his recent breakup, therefore decided to drink excessively. The alcohol consumption led to impulsivity and poor judgment, which facilitated his demise. The lesson in this case is that pouring alcohol on a problem never extinguishes it. In fact, it only adds fuel to the fire. Those are my thoughts on the case of Scott Spivey and Weldon Boyd. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Unfortunately, corruption on the part of the police happens more often than people think. Police operate in secrecy and can get away with all types of offenses. This case further demonstrates how secret their behavior can remain. If it were not for the recordings, the corruption in this case never would have been detected. This is pretty frightening for people as they contemplate interacting with the police on a daily basis. For those who do interact on a daily basis, at some point in just about everyone's life, there will be some interaction with law enforcement, even if it's not particularly negative. This idea that they can operate in secrecy, and frequently do, is pretty frightening. They can pretty much do whatever they want, especially if they don't repeat that behavior over the long run. If a pattern develops, it's easier to catch them. But if they do something bad one time, they can often get away with it. When they are covering up for people who may have committed an offense, it's not like anybody's going to run to the police later on and tell them about it. So it only adds to their ability to keep their behavior a secret. When the police are accused of corruption, they often point to the accusers and say that those accusers are just promoting a conspiracy theory. But sometimes conspiracies are true. I think this case is a reminder that everything the police do should be recorded on video. There shouldn't really be any exceptions to this. As more cases come out highlighting corruption, it makes me wonder how many times the police got away with corruption in the past when there were no body camera videos. It's a pretty frightening prospect. Law enforcement officers possess too much power to escape accountability. Yet it seems like they're highly interested in doing this. I've covered many cases where, when looking at the body camera, it's clear the officers are nervous that it's running, and they signal each other to turn it off, to turn the body cameras off. As I mentioned, this has happened several times. Several cases I've looked at, you can see these not so subtle signals of officers trying to get those cameras to be deactivated. It should make the public nervous when police officers are trying to hide their behavior.